like better or worse, stripped. If I lose everything tomorrow, this is who I am. It's just who I am. And when I stepped out and said that, I was super fortunate. I had some loving people around me, but I was prepared. Like if people were going to judge me or dislike me or whatever, I was willing to leave that behind. But the risk brought me greater intimacy, and it gave me a sense of safety to keep going courageously on my path.
And it was an invitation to people to support you, but also for more people that you could help to come in. And if you don't put out that invitation, whatever it is for you, then no one's coming to the party if there's no invitations, or if you're trying to show your house but it's not an open house, no one's coming in.
Welcome to the Intrepid Soul podcast, where we explore what it takes to build a human life that's congruent with your soul. I'm Katie Benway, a mystic, teacher, and author, here to walk with you through the wilds of the human experience as we get to know and get closer to the soul. Let's get curious, courageous, and conscious together. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome back to the Intrepid Soul podcast. Today, I have Brady Sadler with me. I love Brady. I'm so excited to talk to Brady. He's a lifelong friend, a 20-year friend, a colleague, a fellow journeyer. And we've come together to have this conversation today about creativity and healing and the soul. And we're so psyched to get into it. So let me tell you a little bit about Brady, and then we'll dive right in. Brady Sadler is the founder of The Afternoon Shift, a platform and podcast that helps mid-career marketing, media, and creative leaders navigate career evolution. In addition to building this community, Brady works as a consultant, partnering with brands, agencies, and media companies on strategy, content, marketing, and business growth. Before launching The Afternoon Shift, Brady co-founded and served as CEO of Double Elvis, the award-winning podcast company behind hit series like Disgraceland, Dead and Gone, and Dear Young Rocker. Earlier in his career, he spent more than a decade in the agency world, helping a wide range of brands grow through creative storytelling and strategic partnerships. He is also the author of the book Collaboration is King: How Game Changers Create Marketing Partnerships that Build Brands and Grow Businesses. Welcome, Brady. Thank you for being here.
So glad to be here. Thank you.
So Brady and I have known each other for 20 years, maybe like a little bit more, right? And we met early on in our careers, in our 20s, when we were fresh out of college and eager to please, eager to work hard, eager to make our way in the world. And we have been friends ever since. And we're the kind of friends who could go a year plus without talking or connecting. And the moment we connect, it's a 3-hour conversation and we pick right up where we left off. And I feel like that's really special. Friendships like this are really special. So I appreciate it. Yeah.
Agreed. Yes. And why it's so fun to now share a little bit of that with other people, because we're always reflecting at points in our conversations and how the things we're talking about are potentially interesting to people, or their conversations we're having in a lot of different circles. So it'll be fun to do that today and be able to share it around.
Yeah. So Brady and I have a couple of things in common, and that's sort of where I want to begin this conversation. So Brady's a guy who's really, really creative. So here's how I would describe you. I think Brady's an artist. He is a musician. He is a deep thinker. He's a communicator. There's artistry and creativity around his words. And when I think about creativity, Brady, I think my language about creativity is the soul. I think about you as someone who is soulful. And you often frame your life's journey as exploring, unfolding, getting closer to your own creativity, your own authenticity through creativity. And I think about my life's journey, and the language I would use is I have been utterly compelled to find my soul, to connect to it, to continue to unfold in its authenticity. And when I was thinking about this conversation in advance, I was thinking it's the same thing. I think of creativity as life force. I think of it as our truest essence, a part of us that doesn't die, a part of us that we could ignore but won't go away, a part of us that keeps knocking. And so I think about my identification with the soul and your identification with creativity. And I think there's such synergy there because there's these cycles of death and rebirth and pursuing and longing and driving, and then relief when you're there.
Absolutely. And I think just like any kind of spiritual experience can feel physically and emotionally moving, a great creative
Mm,
experience, artist performance, encounter with creativity and artwork can do the same thing. And I know that is a sign for me of just how much of an artist I am in my heart and soul.
mm,
And as you described in terms of the evolution, for a long time, that was a scary thing to actually believe and to honor in any way, because I felt like artist was a title given to people who did very specific things, and
mm.
that it wasn't me. And
Yeah.
still feels a little strange to use that word, which I know you use intentionally for that reason, and you're provoking me in the best way.
Yeah, right. I think that sometimes relationally, one of the values of relationships is that someone else can see the truth of us before either we fully see it or we're ready to accept and embody it, right? And it's the relationships, the people who really like just love us without ego and see us without ego, and that can reflect back to us the truest parts of ourselves. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. And
Yeah.
you've helped me to do that in many, many times over the years. I'm super grateful for that.
Likewise. Yeah. So, when we think about creativity, here's one of my questions for you. You founded the Afternoon Shift, which is like this awesome platform and podcast for folks who are navigating kind of mid-career. And you and I are in our mid 40s. Astrologically, 42 is the midpoint of life. So, by all accounts, we are at midlife. And whether in your experience you encounter a lot of people in career where that change, that shift, that oh my god, I can't do this anymore, I need to do something else, or this part of life just dumped me out, it's over and I have to create something new. My version of that is I see a lot of clients who are in their 40s saying I can't do this anymore, or I've got to get out of this, or I've got to change this. And so
Right.
that the wisdom of midlife, the pain of midlife. So I'm wondering how much of that pain, that wisdom that comes with midlife, how has that driven your desire to learn about your own creativity and your own authenticity? And are there ways you would accept or embrace or express creativity now that you wouldn't 20 years ago, 10 years ago?
The time that we have in this form
Mm,
becomes, and the limitations of that, I think, become more and more apparent as we start to get older. And for me, that proved to be a nudge in various ways, especially around creativity, to say, okay, like if I am not going to honor and engage with what starts to feel more and more true to me now, then when? And
right.
then through the help of folks like you, other coaches, I have tiptoed my way into creative projects and
Mm,
felt energized. And when I'm able to also add the self awareness and some discipline to those practices, they start to pick up momentum and it just
mm,
feels great. And good things start to happen, both the things that you might expect and lots of unexpected things.
mhm.
And that becomes undeniable. So then when you, as soon as you've sort of tasted, I've tasted that, then when I'm not doing that and
Yeah.
I'm like heads down back to like traditional work, Brady, it's like, oh, wait a minute, that stuff's missing.
Mm,
And it starts to kind of the voices gets louder and louder that says like, dude, how long are you going to go without like posting something or making a video or, doing anything that honors that creativity. And
Mhm.
also, for whatever reason, I just have always been self-conscious about so much and cared so much about what other people thought.
Mm.
And that is really stifling from a creative standpoint.
Yeah.
So you experiment with that, you start to see that you actually have people who are encouraging and supportive, and you
Mhm.
don't want to give away your power, but it certainly helps to know that there are
Mhm.
people cheering you on
Mm.
and reflecting back to you like you are to me that, okay, you are an artist, you are a creative person, keep doing more of that. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that just hopefully picks up steam. And in terms of the afternoon shift and wanting to help other people to find whatever their version is of that thing and then figure out how to build a bridge from that to making money and having a career. I'm really inspired and feel drawn to the idea of helping with that. I think because at times I've felt that
Mhm.
strain so powerfully. I want to keep finding my way through and to the other side of it and seeing if I
Mhm.
can help other people do the same.
Yeah. I think too, like these points we get to, these thresholds we arrive at and then hopefully cross in life, often marked by age and experience, where the pain of not answering the call of creativity, of life force, of authenticity outweighs the fear of losing stability, safety, acceptance, belonging, whatever was promised to us, whatever. I mean, because there are a lot of promises in our society made when we abandon ourselves. Come away from your authenticity, step away from your creativity, lock into 9 to 5, lock into 5 days a week, lock into the system. We promise stability. That is the gig, at least currently. And what I see too with people at various stages in life is like the pain of choosing safety and stability, and then therefore the self-abandonment that is implicit in that, it becomes so significant. And it's like one has no choice but to start to acknowledge, here's this authentic thing I need to do. Here's this creative thing I need to do. Here's this thing that like might fly in the face of stability or safety. How do I pay rent or the mortgage, or how do I make money, or what's my family going to say when I leave this job, right? And
Absolutely.
yeah, like that freedom, it's like it's like that call. I always say this about like intuition and our life force. It doesn't stop calling us. That freedom doesn't stop calling us, but with freedom comes responsibility, comes fear, comes courage. I mean, there's all of these components when you answer that question. So did you have breaking points around this, around answering your authenticity? Because you said that you're someone who's been self-aware or self-conscious or concerned about what other people think.
Absolutely. I had a moment where I was working with my coach, Mark J. Silverman, and I was traveling on a business trip in a Virgin branded hotel, Richard Branson. And I was doing what I had developed as a habit, which was just pointing out different things in the environment that were marketing messages.
Mm.
And I was sharing that on the call with Mark, and he said, the energy flowing out of you, the enthusiasm right now about this topic is so contagious. And so much of what we tackle together is the challenges in being a leader in the marketing and advertising and creative world. Why aren't you sharing the thing you're sharing with me in this private space more publicly? Because it might
Mm.
do a couple things. It might be an outlet for creativity. And if nothing else, it's a win, but it
Yeah.
also might be a tool for you that can more directly tie to business. And he'd been coaching me for a long time at that point, and he threw down the gauntlet and said, if you don't close the laptop with me, open it back up and make and post a video about this right now, I don't think I'm going to coach you anymore.
Wow.
And like, I can't help you if you can't help yourself, kind of a moment.
Yeah, yeah.
And I nervously did just that,
Mm.
and the positive comments started flowing, and that led to 75 weeks straight of posting a video like that. I ended up
Mm.
branding the series The Curse of the Marketer, which is a nod to sort of the positive side of seeing things in your environment and the curiosity that's required to breed a certain type of creativity. And it really unlocked a lot for me. It then starts to compound. The momentum really builds.
Mhm.
I started doing this collage project where I was taking old vintage magazine ads and layering them over vintage vinyl record art. And then from there, I found momentum with the project that led to my book, Collaboration is
Mhm.
King, and so on and so forth. I learned a big lesson there about momentum and small steps. You know, to be the person that posts 75 straight weeks of content, you have to be the person that posts one day of content.
Right.
And I
Right.
think that's something else to really make sure to put a fine point on, which is this like sliding scale. We have the vision of the artist or creator that we might look up to in any given discipline, but
Mm.
to engage with that discipline could be as simple as doing it yourself, sharing it with one person or five people. It doesn't have to be a commercial enterprise in and of itself. In fact, it most
Mhm.
of the time won't be. So
Right.
reframing and right sizing, all these tools that I've been lucky to pick up along the way. And I think
Mm.
the last point on that would be, even as I'm saying it, I'm realizing the number of people who have helped to support the creative journey, the tools that I've picked up along the way. These all, if you're looking for them, if you're even a little bit open to it,
Mm.
and you stay on that course, you'll have dips and moments where, it ebbs and flows, but you are starting to create the compound interest of creativity.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think about like your job, right? And so you understand the value of encouraging your client, yeah, make content, make posts. And it was hard for you as a human being to get yourself to do that, right? And I think, if I can go here, I think some of this was about vulnerability for you. And some of this was about being seen. You're a really talented guy at stage left. And talent, encouraging the person on stage, helping them step out. I know this, I've been the recipient of it. But there's some element of you that's supposed to be out there in your own way. And part of creativity, I think, is like therein lies vulnerability. Therein lies something about us that's really raw and honest, that if people rejected or shamed or maligned, would sting.
Absolutely. The new version of that for me is like to be able to post myself playing guitar and singing a song. Like I have that
Yeah.
one in my head that
Yeah.
it seems terrifying to me. And my friend
Right.
Wasim does it every once in a while on LinkedIn, and he ties the song he's covering back to a theme. And I am sitting there like, whoa, dude, that is so brave. And I've told him how much I
Yeah.
admire him for doing that. But I think it looks different for everybody.
Mhm.
And yes, there is a major element of vulnerability. And the kid inside
Mhm.
is worried about what other people are going to say and being teased and ostracized or whatever that is.
Right. I remember, and you were actually a part of this for about 12 years. I had a pretty traditional career in marketing communications. That's how Brady and I met. And when I was doing my own kind of work around who am I and coming into to who and what I am, it became really clear that I was called to do this for other people. At the time, it was to do readings for other people. And I had gotten to a point where I was doing this stuff on the side quietly on the weekend. And it was like a secret because I, to the rest of the world, was this pretty successful, in the system, in business, 9 to 5. Like I call it, like I was the good girl. I was absolutely the good girl. And I was totally tied in, like hook, line, sinker tied in to, if I am the good girl and I work hard, I will be safe and secure, mostly because people will like me and approve of me. I mean, I was in. And in my mid 20s, when, you know, a lot of this connection cracked open for me, and I really began to, frankly, I was like, what's wrong with me? What's going on with me? You know, and it led a few years later to my acupuncturist saying, I need you to do readings for a couple of clients. They're really stuck, you know? And I was like, no, I can. And I offered to do them for free. And then within a few months, they were sending me clients. And very quickly, because again, like life force, creativity, authentic expression, it has a gravity of its own. It will come for you and you can ignore it and it will cause you pain. And it came for me. And here I am, like by day, doing all of the things that are acceptable to society and being really good at it. And then on the weekends, quietly doing readings in my acupuncturist's office for this growing list of referrals and clients. And within 6 months, I needed to rent office space. And there was this like force on its own. It's like the second I acknowledged it, it became big and it triggered all the things in me. And so here's what I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of, it may have been the summer after, because that was 2010. So it may have been the summer of 2011. And or maybe even 2 years later, but I was getting to the point where I needed to leave my job. I had to leave my safe kind of corporate job to do what I do now full time. And I spent a summer, I made a list of 10 people. So this is not hyperbole, this is real. I made a list of 10 people, and at the top of that page I had written, these are the 10 people that if they stop being friends with me, it will break my heart. And I better grieve now before I jump into this new world, okay? True dramatic Katie fashion. It's just that I feel all the things, right? So my thought had been, if I'm going to have to grieve losing these friends, these people I really care about, I need to know now, because I'm going to jump, I'm going to take this leap. And if these guys aren't with me, like that's going to kind of fuck me up and I got to get square. Okay. And you were on the list. And I called it my summer of coming out. And I went to lunch with each of these 10 people and I like confessed. I've seen dead people since I was 3 years old. This is the story. I know things I shouldn't know. Psychic medium. I want to help people. Spiritual woo woo, you know, and then hold my breath and wait for the reaction. And, you know, I have compassion for her. I call her a girl. I mean, I was an adult, but I have compassion for her, right? Because like how tender and sweet. And like also I just want to give her a hug and be like, oh, you got this. And in that experience, that summer of like confessing to these 10 friends, every single one of you in your own ways said, I'm here. I opt in. Most of you said, oh, can I tell you about this weird experience I had? Like my grandmother's cabin at the lake is haunted. Or I mean, people like started talking to me about deep things, right? And here's one thing. Hang on for the story. I'm almost done. Here's one thing about that was in confessing or sharing, the thing I was most afraid of, like, here is my authentic self. I am leaving this tried and true, super successful corporate career to literally go be a psychic medium. That's what I'm doing. This is authentic and true. It's stripped down. If you decide to not love me, then this is the end of us because I have no choice but to go. Okay. So I'm in that place. And where every single lunch / conversation ended up was in a deeply intimate place because every single person sitting across from me shared with me something equally tender. It was not my end game at all. They did their own confessing. Each person confessed their own thing. And because of what I was sharing, it was usually around spirituality, death, you know, pain. And so we actually ended up all being closer or more intimately connected because I left those lunches knowing about someone's deepest stuff, right? And so I think number one, the courage to say, like, here's who I am, that authenticity, which, and I'm using the word authenticity synonymously with creation, creativity, life force. Like, better or worse, stripped. If I lose everything tomorrow, this is who I am. It's just who I am. And when I stepped out and said that, I was super fortunate. I had some loving people around me, but I was prepared. Like if people were going to judge me or dislike me or whatever, I was willing to leave that behind. But the risk brought me greater intimacy, and it gave me a sense of safety to keep going courageously on my path.
And it was an invitation to people to support you, but also for more people that you could help to come in.
Right.
And if you don't put out that invitation, whatever it is for you, then no one's coming to the party if there's no invitations, or if you're trying to show your house but it's not an open house, no one's coming in.
Mhm.
And so,
Yeah.
as you said, you start to feel that if you are closed off, to keep the analogy going, then you start to feel that, and it can manifest in really, really scary ways until you honor it. And the other thing I heard in your story was the support you got from everybody. And I am a big proponent of taking responsibility for oneself, absolutely, and for finding your peeps and, really teaming up. And I don't think any of us can do it alone.
Yeah.
And, you know, that has become more and more clear as well as I try to honor the truth in all of this in this experience. That the first book was marketing with like a side of the human stuff, and it's feeling completely flipped, and it's the human stuff with the side of marketing. So
Yeah.
I think that invitation goes at every level, and I started to notice it when in my agency days, going from being more what I thought felt polished and buttoned up to talking about the concert I was going to see in music. And go figure, the client or prospect wanted to talk about music first in the next meeting, and we were able to weave it into some of our projects more in places even that I thought it couldn't
Mm.
or wouldn't fit. And that was a small example as well of just that
Yeah.
vulnerability and honesty and honoring of the creative interests proving to be the path.
Right. And it's easy, it would be easy for someone listening to say, "What's a big deal, Brady, talking about music?" Yeah, music is cool. But for you, music is, if I may, part of the language of your soul.
Mhm.
Like music gets to the core of you. And so, I'm like, yeah, cool. Like no big, talk about music. Or like there are probably people when I was, sharing over lunches that summer who were like, "Katie, you're fine." But because it was so me, it was so authentically me, it felt so much riskier. And I think even when you're talking about music, there's a way that music is not just music to you. It's vulnerable. It's connected to your vulnerability and your life force.
And it wasn't what I thought belonged in the conference room, in
Right.
what I had built up to be a certain type of environment. So from clothing to conversation to the ways of interacting, that had just been something I'd built up and felt like, as a result of some of the promises that you talked about earlier, to achieve those things, it needed to look like this. And instead of, what could I do to experiment? And that was the other thing I heard in your story that was really interesting, as well as I know it as you retold it today, the ways that you tested into this new path. Right, you started talking about it, then you started uh, offering it as a one-off. Then a friend said, let's do it over here, I have some clients that could also use this. And then you built up your own practice, and then you leased an office. You didn't just jump from
Yeah.
this discovery straight into the career change. And in this work I'm exploring now with career evolution, whether it's another position, another company, or your own company, the ability to test into that
Yeah.
is something that comes up again and again and seems to be an ingredient to the
Mm.
successful sort of recipe.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I've developed, and you and I have talked about this, are some of my own core values. And I think that's a process, an outcome associated with just living. And so I want to talk about those because you and I have actually talked about core values a lot. So in the context, I guess, of this conversation at this moment, here's what I would offer is when I had to take that leap, and I think you would agree because you've taken leaps away from what is systematically safe, what promises, whether that's a bullshit promise or not, safety or stability. When you come away from what's safe, what's systemically quote unquote safe, I think you then are compelled to figure out, well, then what purpose am I following? If it's not the rules, if it's not the hierarchy, if it's not work 30 years and get the retirement, then what is it? And I see that a lot with people, like when they have the courage to step away from something that's not right or that's ill fitting or that doesn't allow for all of them, there can be a little bit of a crisis about then like, what am I building or what am I aligning to? It feels so nebulous when it's your own dream. And I have found in that moment that core values are really helpful because it replaces the rules, the society, the man, the structure with some kind of structure that's orienting, that's wayfinding. And for me, and I developed these a couple of years ago and I have adopted them in my personal life and in my business life. The core of the Intrepid Soul Collective are these values. So self-awareness, personal responsibility, courage, compassion, and community. And the sentence I have about that is my opinion, my experience is that without those, your life doesn't work. Without those, you can't build a life from the soul. And for me, that's what it's all about, building a life from the soul.
I find that to be so helpful. And the use of those values, as you said, personally and professionally, it's something that coming from the marketing and brand world and even the entrepreneur in me, like we build these values and the classic thing is always like, well, you have them and then they go on the wall or, you don't use them, but then companies also lean into them really heavily. And to step back and ask yourself, like, what values? This is one of the exercises along the path of self-discovery. When you start to get it on, you find these different exercises and practices that help you get to hopefully a much better place. And so I think, with your first one here, self-awareness, if you're in denial about this calling or anything we've talked about today, then you won't have the conversations, you won't put out the invitation to move along that journey and to grow and evolve. So I think it really does start there. And that's one of those things that has to run as a constant so that as you're going through it, you're clocking what is energy giving, what is energy sucking, what is the way that this is affecting all the other people around me and my responsibilities. And that's one that I keep bumping up against a lot, which is the responsibilities of life, whether that's as a partner, parent, child, community member, friend, and some of the things that might call to us or that might push us away. And this idea of balance is often kind of looked down upon in various ways, that like balance is a myth or pick your
Right.
pithy
Yeah,
thing.
trite now. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And yet I think that flourishing, which is a word that I really
Mm.
started to think more about recently as a result of an event I went to and some talks, versus thriving. That like flourishing is where community and the all parts of a system are in a good place. Thriving is more of a personal thing, but it turns out that without those, thriving is almost like the myth, because
Yeah.
you can't do it, as I said earlier, on your own. So I'm really interested in flourishing. And I say that because to me, that connotes balance where all these different things have to be working. And it's not to, as you said with your conversations with the friends, like it's okay to move on from some relationships, certainly if they're toxic or harmful, yes. And honoring responsibilities while going on this journey and
Mm,
while trying to become more creative and more vulnerable and honest. These are the really difficult parts of the process that self-awareness helps to inform.
yeah.
And the, you know, the challenges and the grappling with all of that, don't start or stop anywhere. They just kind of become part of it. And I long for the, if I get to there, then it'll be okay thing. It's a story I tell myself. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of us do as part of the promises that you've said a couple times we are told or we make to ourselves, and then we miss so much because we're foreboding joy or whatever it is to get to that false proxy of what we think will be happiness or contentment, or we've like earned the right to be okay. Like I play those games all the time and I'm aware of it, and
Right.
and so I'm working on it.
Yeah. So one of the things I'm thinking of as you're talking, and I kind of want to come back to flourishing because I love flourishing. But one of the things I'm thinking of about self awareness, and the lens that you're looking at it through, is like part of being self aware is getting close to your pain. And I think there's an emotional stamina present in that. Like, I can feel this. I can feel this and not back away from it. I can feel this and go to the next coaching session. I can feel this discomfort and keep playing music. And I think that kind of pain, that emotional space of like I'm not there yet, or this feels uncomfortable, or this feels scary, as you're committing to self-awareness, as you're telling yourself the truth. I think telling yourself the truth is like central to self-awareness, right? I think I hear in what you're saying that like getting next to that, telling yourself the truth and then also experiencing the pain or the discomfort and then keeping going, which is kind of why my next value is courage, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is not something you can opt out of to get to where
Mm,
you want to go. And I think you can practice courage and you can do it in these small ways like we spoke about in terms of prototyping little tests and things. And you if you seek them out, I'm thinking about two experiences. One time I went to this weekend event and we were doing a facilitated exercise. We buddied up with someone and I was paired up with this woman who was actually her son was more of my contemporary in this space. She was there for a variety of different reasons, but we were asked to write our own eulogies and then share them with one another. And we
what?
we the like speed vulnerability thing is unmatched in any experience I've ever had. And
Wow.
we were both willing to go there, and she talked about her battles with sobriety and how proud she was of her son. And in my eulogy I had talked about how I had made music, and we're both crying, and it's like, and then pausing for moments to be like, wait a minute, where are we? Who are you? And
Right.
it was so moving, but
Wow.
the courage to write, even like what was honest,
Mm,
was even though knowing like it didn't have to go any further than this stranger who didn't know anyone else I really knew. And there was just the risk of being honest with myself and this one other person. Like the
right.
courage to do that felt deep. And yet, like you start to build a little bit of that muscle in those kinds of like really intense but safe experiences.
Yeah.
Another one was with you, and I was visiting your office, and it was like a casual visit. We just started chatting as we do, and then it got to a place and you were like, hey, can we try something? And we kind of went back to an experience I had with music at a young age,
Mm,
and through your prompting, I gave myself permission to trust my own musical inclinations and interests and artistry and so forth.
Right.
And that was incredibly moving and meaningful. And these are just two of many examples of
Yeah.
things that I sought out because I felt the knock on the door that you've alluded to from a creative standpoint. And look, I've been very lucky to have friends like you, to have coaches, to have the means to get coaches, to be able to
Yeah.
go to retreats and experiences. And so another thing that I would like to do is just bring more of this stuff, even what we're doing today by having the conversation is just like bring more of this stuff to people.
Right.
Thankfully, I think our culture is evolving. As many problems as we have in our world and society, we are evolving in terms of it being okay to talk about more of this stuff openly. You and I are of an age when
Hmm.
it was still a little uh, taboo to be this open and vulnerable, but we're emerging to a better place. And
Yeah.
these are things that people can do. And the more you do that, and to bring it back to your second value, have compassion for yourself, that
Mm.
like you're not foolish to be sitting there crying in this exercise. Like you're actually probably working through some shit that means you're going to be a better friend and coworker and parent or whatever you are.
Yeah. Well, and you said it like I do think when you said, my first book was like marketing with a little side of humanity, and now the work you're doing is about the human with a little side of marketing. And that's one thing I would say as a coach, like I sort of like laugh, not in a negative way, but I laugh when people are like, I'm just a business coach. And I'm like, it's what? Because everything that is unhealed in you, everything that is unhealed in me, everything that is unhealed in someone is expressing itself across all areas. And certainly at work, in business, where you are most of the time, all that stuff is coming out, right? And you can't change how you're behaving in the workplace if you don't go in and get it. Like, what happened when you were 5? What is this thing that you're carrying? And that's certainly one of the things that I've seen. I'm so glad the pendulum is swinging, because I think there's so much more emotional stamina and comfort. I think we have a ways to go, but there is more comfort. And when we're courageous enough to say, yeah, I sat through therapy, I've gone to coaches, I've cried, I've done, and you as a man, I mean, I have a permission as a woman that you haven't had slash don't often have, right? I mean, so I think it's even more courageous as a man to say, yeah, like I'm doing this. I'm going in, I'm learning about myself. I'm writing in a journal. I'm processing, and doing all this stuff. I mean, and I think that's some of the courageousness. And I love your stories about the retreat, being asked to write your eulogy. That's wild. That's wild. And you took that opportunity. And I think that's the thing is life will keep giving you opportunities to embrace your authenticity, to be like radically intimate and vulnerable with yourself.
And when you're attuned to that, and your next value, personal responsibility, the time I got to go to this chat recently, and John Kabat-Zinn was the keynote,
Mm.
well respected person in the mindfulness, sort of modern mindfulness guru, who also brought that definition of creativity that I love, connecting the seemingly unconnected. He connected mindfulness with medicine and healthcare and built this pain
Mm.
clinic. And he talks a lot about what it means to bring things together that don't obviously go together. And he calls it thinking from the orthogonal, which is like an angle that's not direct. And that day was so moved by his keynote. And then you got to rank which breakout session you wanted to go to, and I got my first choice, which was him. So then I would go to a second session with him, and there I'm like in tears, because he's talking about how when he had his kids, he spent over, a decade, 2 decades getting up at 4 a.m. to do the things that he needed to do that were true to him, that he'd learned he needed to be who he wanted to be. And that was him taking personal responsibility in the face of his time during more of the date being taken by other things that he had to do. So he just kind of looked us in the eyes and said, like, it's up to you. If you really want it, like, there you go, some tough love. And that
Yeah.
was incredibly moving and sticks with me every day. And I don't do it every day. Like, when I'm at my best, yeah, like, and I understand there's also a lot of sort of Instagram hype about the morning routines and the bros and all this stuff. So I know that is sometimes where people go and they hear us talk about these things. And I came to learn that mornings are a great time for me if I'm disciplined and I'm going to bed early and not snacking at night. And like, we're getting into, these are like the real things that either do or don't feed into my better self
Yeah.
showing up.
Yeah.
Then when I'm on that roll, like, the creativity is happening more. And so momentum is a thing that I really believe in. And one of the other morning practices is something called morning pages. Julia Cameron, who wrote The Artist Way, it's a very well-known journaling practice. I find that, especially if it's not something you've done before, or if you are having a hard time sticking with it, she has this journal that you can buy with prompts and follow day to day. But the other really interesting thing that she pairs with journaling is these artist dates. And that's the idea of once a week by yourself going and seeking out something creative and just being with it. And she talks about this sort of like conversation between your output, freehand writing 3 pages and cleaning the windshield, as she says, and then this like input of other creativity and what the combination of those things do. And when I am disciplined and do that, it creates some really awesome things. And I've gifted that journal to a lot of people, and I've heard many similar experiences. And all of it draws back to, I think, this value of yours around personal responsibility and just like finding the time. It's not finding, I'm stopping myself because it's making the time
Yeah.
to actually go do those things, even as John Kabat-Zinn said, if it meant he had to get up at 4 a.m. to do
Right.
it.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the things I'm thinking as you're talking is this, like, part of being a human here on the planet, a soul who's in a human body, we are being asked to create things here and embody who we are and what we are. It's how we make things manifest. It's how we create matter. And what I hear in your practices, and I agree, one of the aspects of personal responsibility is like the carving out of space within yourself. And I would say that that's like a space of intimacy, of self-awareness, because journal, to develop some kind of daily practice or some kind of like ceremony or ritual, there is something really simple in that, something that brings your awareness to the present moment. It's also, I think, pouring into yourself, and it develops intimacy when you connect in. And whether that's like a little meditation, or whether that's dropping in and checking in with your inner child that is sitting in your heart space and working on whatever issue, whether that's playing some music, it's creating intimacy in your own self. It's developing your own capacity to be intimate with yourself. And we need that in order to then be intimate with our calling and the truest expression of our soul or creativity. We need that to hold us as we're intimate with other people, as we're intimate with the world and our community. And there is a measure of courage in developing that intimacy with oneself. There's a measure of personal responsibility, like, this is mine to maintain. I was just talking about this the other day. I've been doing some like grief work, grieving some stuff that I didn't realize I needed to. And I've been really saying, no one's going to make me do this, right? I have to do this every day. I check in with the grieving part of me. And it makes me more comfortable with that part. And it makes me trust myself. It makes me respect myself. And I think that that's like the stuff of intimacy, which then allows us to be creative, allows us to be courageous. It allows us to show up authentically. If we know what it's like to show up for ourselves authentically, and yeah, it's scary or painful or uncomfortable, but I did it. I'm okay. Actually, I'm getting a little bit better. We learn like a self-trust and a self-respect that buoys us as we offer our most authentic selves to other people or the relationship or relationships of the world.
And the duality in all of this, one of my favorite things to reference is the first rule of improv, which is yes and. The other way, like Dr. Becky Kennedy, who I like, says two things are true. And that is, I'm sure there's some mysticism behind that. And I'd love to hear from you.
Yes.
The fact that all your values fit together so well, and that this one around personal responsibility and the intimacy you're describing can also push you to a place where you have more questions. And then you need your last value, which is community. And as we've said over and over, people like yourself to share these things with and to check on yourself and to have a check on yourself, so that when you inevitably bump into the paradox of life at every turn, that someone is there to help you or hopefully a lot of people are there to help you navigate through it. And it's one of the things in this flip human with a side of marketing, leading with the former, that I'm experimenting with. I am curious, and this was actually the advice I did get to chat with John Kabat-Zinn, and I asked him, how do you balance like all the demands of modern society and culture and work and earning with all of the spirituality and the creative calling and everything you might want to do or how you want to live in its ideal sense. And he brought up this idea of the orthogonal and how he brought mindfulness to medicine when, as he said, mindfulness was at the farthest end of the lunatic fringe. That's how he described it in the 70s, when he thought it would be a good idea to bring meditation into the clinical setting. And he did. And now, of course, it's common practice. And so he encouraged me to think through the orthogonal, which I had to Google and figure out what it meant. And then when I read it, I was like, oh my goodness, this is so incredible. This definition that I've shared already today, that I've been toting around creativity being the ability to connect the seemingly unconnected, like seemingly unconnected, coming from a different angle, like, whoa, it's the same thing.
Right.
That was really exciting and affirming. But I've been thinking about how this human stuff, if for example, a lot of my peers are interested in learning AI and how to, by the way, this is the longest I've gone in an interview without mentioning AI, so bravo to us. But here it is in 2025. And how do we keep up with that? And how do we stay sharp and keep our edge in marketing? We need to know the tools, but we also have to embrace all the stuff that the tools can't do. And what if it was human with a side of AI as the training? And that was the way that leaders got together in a small group to tackle this moment.
Yes.
That's something I'm excited about, but it speaks to community and all the other values you've shared.
Yeah. So two things I want to say. One is, and I won't go on the AI tangent, but what I think is going to happen with AI as a soul person is that we keep manifesting and creating realities as human beings that force us back to our humanity. So we're going to swing too far. That's what we're going to do because we're humans. We're going to swing way too far with AI, and there's there's going to be great stuff, and then there's going to be really troubling stuff because we're going to swing too far. And then it's going to show us where we're not connected to our own humanity. So that's that's my 2 cents, because to me, we're here to come close to our humanity, and all of the pain we go through is because we're disconnected from it. I think the last core value we haven't really touched on is compassion. And here's what I'm thinking of is when I think about the 20-something Brady that I knew, that I met, that, you've talked about kind of meditatively going back and connecting with him and even younger. So from your mid-40s, what, with compassion, would you say to 20-something Brady? What compassion does 20-something Brady need that you could bring him now?
It's probably the idea that you don't have to prove anything, that you have a lot to learn, but that you can trust your instincts a little bit more. And I think this idea of testing and prototyping with intention. And I learned to do that later, but at that moment, every decision felt so heavy. I had just come off of like living in Orlando for the year I spent working for Disney right out of college, and had this like very heightened experience. And then the only way I thought I could top that was to go to Hawaii for a year, and I did that, and like had this wild, totally unexpected, difficult experience, and then came back, and then ended up in New Hampshire, and all of these stories were building, and I was feeling the weight of the next decision. And some of that led to some sort of paralysis, and like, okay, I'm not going to do the next thing. But if I had known that I could be more intentional about testing things, I probably would have found my way with a bit more grace and maybe compassion for myself.
Yeah. Right. So like you're allowed to test, you're allowed to try it. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you have a question, instead of, lately I've been saying pontificate less, prototype more. Like I have always been prone to overthinking and like finding people like you and going deep on subjects, and that's great. And at a point, finding a way to actually test and feel and experience the thing versus just talk about the thing, I think my balance in that equation was off.
Yeah, there's safety in the talking, right? Like I always say that I think as a witness, the hardest part of healing isn't sitting on the therapist or coach's couch naming, and though that can be grievous and difficult and painful, there that's actually not as hard as when you finish naming and sorting out, here's what happened to me, here's the thing, here's what brought me here. I see with people all the time, the hardest part is like, wait, now I have to embody it. Now I've changed, and now I have to act like it. I have to go out into my own world and prune or get rid of some stuff that doesn't work, change some things, try something new, be new. I think that's the hardest part of healing, is the embodiment part, is and you and I track our language is so, we have different language, but we track so close together. I mean, prototyping, I think, is the same thing as embodiment. What you're saying is, if you have enough of an idea about something, maybe it's 52%, you got to go give it a try, right? And like, that's good. That's more than okay. It's good. And I would say it's good because it expands capacity in your nervous system. It teaches you how to trust and respect yourself. It creates opportunity for people, relationships, things, situations, ideas to come to you that otherwise wouldn't. It makes you available. And the courage to step out and be a little bit new. I mean, I talk to people a lot about this. Like, what are we releasing that you're sure is a no? What's got to go?
Mm-hmm.
And you often don't know what the full yes is. You just know what the no's are.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to go act like it. Like, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to, I like when I was sort of going through my transition, I didn't know what this business would become. I had no idea it would become this.
Right.
But I knew I couldn't. I mean, at that point, I was crying once a week at my corporate job, literally saying, my soul can't handle this. I didn't even understand what I was fully saying. Now I totally understand what I was saying. And I didn't know what my soul needed, but I knew it wasn't that. Right.
Right.
So I tried. I got out there. I let go of something, or I tried something new. And so courageous. I mean, it's like, I think those are the moments where there's so much becoming.
And to make it really, really practical and set those embodiments, experiments in ways that don't risk it all by any means. They're really, there's a great story during the career transition I had about 8-9 years ago. I got hold of this book, Designing Your Life, which is from these professors at Stanford, and it's based on one of the most popular classes there. And they use this idea of design thinking, which is where prototyping is a prominent key component. And they told the story of someone who opened their own bakery, and they found out that they were miserable in owning that cafe, but they had burned time, money, relationships, so much in the process, and then had to unwind so much to move on. When had they spent a couple of shifts working in a cafe and then shadowed a caterer and then gone to meet with the designer who built the space. It turned out that what they wanted to do was actually design spaces, not own a space like that. But they
Yeah.
broke down and reverse engineered all the ways that someone could discover the piece of the thing that they actually wanted to do that was energy giving, not taking, so on and so forth. And I continue to want to own that lesson
Yeah.
more and more. And then again, all these other values come into play, because sometimes the experiment means you got to be more self-aware. You got to be compassionate to yourself. You've got to have the vulnerability to put yourself out there, even in that smallest way, to know if you can
Yeah.
go do it in a big way.
That's right. I think creativity slash life force slash becoming your authentic self is iterative, right? And that's what you're talking about is, okay, I don't have all the answers, but I know that like that's a no. And I know that this piece is a yes, or I know at least I have to investigate this piece. And I think it's so much easier in hindsight to look and note and identify the places where you've done that. But knowing and that's something that I would tell young Katie with compassion, is because that version of me was so afraid all the time and so trying to control everything, trying to control to keep myself safe. And I would go back and say, this is iterative. Good job. Good job starting with a couple of referral clients for free. Good job renting the tiniest office space known to man. In 15 years, you're going to be super clear about what you're meant to do in the world. But right now, you're actually not clear. And that's by design. That's by design. And I think it's about building that stamina, that, whether that's capacity in our nervous system, the stamina for, I don't know yet, the stamina for growth, the experience living next to creativity and life force and responding to it. Life will teach you how to live in iterations if you let it.
Did you talk to anybody who had the kind of business that you now have, or that you had in the early days before you started to iterate in the early days?
No, partly because, and I think some of the iterative stuff, there's like, I can see you doing it as a man. Some of I look back at how I did it, and it's like very feminine energy what I did, which was, oh my God, I'm in so much pain not answering the call of my soul. I'm going to die if I don't do this. And it sounds dramatic, but it like was legitimately how I felt. I think the toes in the water looked more like my acupuncturist at the time saying, there's something here. Can you meet with my clients?
Mm-hmm.
And so I tried it and did a little piece. And then in 6 months, that first office I rented was actually in her building. It was the tiniest little office. And I hadn't quit my job. I hadn't left my job. So I would say that I didn't do like a full reverse engineer, like go find out if I'd like it, but I figured out how to create enough like lifeboat around me that if as I started to explore this, if it didn't work or if I didn't like it or if it was too unstable, I hadn't fully left my life.
Right.
You
And
know,
that person not only gave you those referrals, but they also like use that space like the same. Yeah.
yeah, so the first couple of readings I did were in her office,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And I did them for free. I wouldn't let people pay me.
Yep.
Quote, because what if I mess people up? That was literally how afraid I was. What if I mess people up? But within 6 months, I needed my own space and I rented this tiny space for $300 a month in her building.
Did she continue that dialogue with you around what was happening, or was it just like, I've got these referrals in this space and then you do everything else?
No, we had this really lovely relationship and there was a lot of overlap because for me, she was a woman, a healer, an intuitive, living a life in congruence with that. Like, so her identity as spiritual, connected, intuitive didn't stop outside her home. It was an extension of.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I did have, now that I'm thinking about it, two other people around me who I could say the same things about, two other women around me whose spiritual lives, whose spiritual identities really extended into their full presence in the world. And and so I didn't, for better or worse, think about business structure. It was more like, how do I get outside of the cage I've been in and start expressing this part of my soul? That's why I say like there's a lot of feminine energy around it because it was very like essence and expressive. And I didn't look at some of the structure. I wish I would have. I learned some hard lessons, but I dove. It was like a surrender. It was a surrender into I have no choice but to acknowledge this, and the whether I found them or the universe sent them to me. There were at least three people who were little pegs on the map that I could point to and talk to and bounce things off of.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't take anything away from us by having help. And that's
Mm,
another aspect of vulnerability that particularly butts up against the feeling of having to prove something that sometimes manifests as a young person,
mm,
especially if you're at all insecure. And that would probably be the other thing I would say to, the 25-year-old me. It's like not having all the answers is
mm,
not a sign of weakness. In fact, the people you'll come to admire most in business will readily admit what they don't know and just help put people around them that do know that stuff, or go out and get the advice from someone.
mm.
And Arminia Barra, this great author, talks about outsight. And I don't think I was quick enough to say, all right, like this situation here, someone else has dealt with this type of client service thing. And if I can't answer it just with the people around me in the company or even around town, like where's the Society of Business Development people? It turns out like Jesse Strawbridge in Boston has got the Hunters Club, or whatever it's called. Like, and there's these people in my position hanging out once a month. Like,
Yeah,
but how
right.
long until I discovered that and started to go hang with those people and understand?
Yeah.
And like the faster you can shorten the distance to, or
Mm,
get to the people who might have something, they might not be a one-to-one. And so if you're looking
mm,
for the exact comp of what you're trying to figure out, then you'll delay, or kind of maybe that perfectionism kicks in, or you might not even be able to see it. But if you
yeah,
are going to find that outside, is
yeah.
something that, just like bringing someone like you into an organization or having a coach period, all these are things that if you are hung up on proving yourself or, trying to assert something about yourself and worried what other people think or that you might undermine your position or anything like that, you're not going to get to the good stuff that you
Yeah.
can find by doing that. And um, there's no shame in it. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Like that is, I think, how success often happens.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a great kind of place to wind down is what you just said is when you're avoiding vulnerability, you are creating lag time between yourself and the next opportunities that want to come to you for you to know yourself. And that being vulnerable brings you more closely and quickly to opportunities to get to know who you are and the iterations of you.
And the longer you delay that, the more of the pain, that you have to feel. And hopefully with the work that you're doing and all this great content that you're putting out, as well as what you do with groups and one-on-one, helping people to avoid or work through that pain faster. We
Yeah.
need more of that. And, I just respect so much what you're doing out there.
Oh, thank
And
you.
anyone listening would be so lucky to work with you and are lucky to have this show. And hopefully we shared some helpful things today.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. Thank you for sharing so much of yourself and your journey. You're someone that I just love and respect so much. And what I love about you, this isn't like now we give each other compliments time. It's really honest. But one thing I want to point this out that what I love about Brady is like your ability to tell yourself the truth, even if it's really hard, even if it's incredibly inconvenient. And I just see that as central to having a relationship with your creativity, having a relationship with your life force, developing capacity to stamina around telling yourself the truth. I just really appreciate that about you and appreciate the way you've shared your truth with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi there. Thank you for listening in to today's episode with Brady Sadler. He is a really wonderful friend of mine. And in listening to and editing this episode for you, I have to tell you that one of the things that struck me was the warmth and vulnerability that's really present with Brady and I. And of course, I know that that's there because he's my friend, but witnessing it on video and audio, it was like I was outside of it for a second. And it really struck me that there is such profound and tremendous value of having connection with someone with whom you can be deep and open and honest and emotional. You can share your pain. You can share your deepest truths. This is so valuable. And I know most of us, including me, don't have tons and tons of people we can do this with. We often have less than 5, sometimes just 1 or 2 or 3. And so I want to encourage you to lean into those spaces and those relationships. On that note, I also want to invite you to join me over at the Intrepid Soul Collective on Patreon. And we're going to do some follow-up exercise/work about this episode. Over at the collective, I'm going to invite you to come join me to write your own eulogy. I know that Brady told us about this exercise and how powerful it was for him. And I want to put a little framework around this for you and invite you to do the same for yourself, to write your own eulogy. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it over in the collective, give you some guidance and framework, and certainly give you the opportunity to share parts or all of that eulogy within that community over there on the collective. That's what we're doing over there. We're building community spaces where you can be honest and vulnerable and open and get to know yourself and get comfortable with sharing parts of yourself, not only with other people, but with yourself, because that's often the biggest battle, isn't it? All right, my friends, meet me over at the Intrepid Soul Collective. Let's write our own eulogies. Thank you for joining me here on the Intrepid Soul podcast. If you'd like to continue the conversation and the work of your soul, join me over on Patreon at the Intrepid Soul Collective. There you'll find tons of resources and support connected to the conversations we have here to help you make your soul work practical and embodied. There are live sessions with me, bonus Q&As where you can go deeper with me and my guests, companion guided meditations and ceremonies, and so much more. Because we can't just talk about it, we've got to become it. Check out the show notes for details and links, and hit follow on this podcast. It'll keep new episodes at the top of your feed, and it helps me build the Intrepid Soul community. Until next time, take good care of yourself and your soul.